Welcome to all of you again. My name is Lucio Rubini from VIU, Venice International University. This afternoon, we have the webinar number 5 that we have organized within the ICARUS project. And you are well aware about the topic of today, but before presenting the speaker of today and presenting also the topic of today, I will leave the floor to Eleonora just for introducing the framework in which this webinar has been organized. Eleonora.
Thank you, Lucio, and welcome everyone. Welcome to our partners and also the participants who are not part of the ICARUS project. So today's webinar is titled Demand Responsive Transport, What's Next? A Conversation with Shotl. And so for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, I am Eleonora too. I work for the Institute for Transport and Logistics, and I'm also the coordinator of the ICARUS project, which is a project that has made this webinar and actually 4 webinars prior to this possible. ICARUS is an European project which is funded by the Interreg Italy-Croatia program. So we have 3 main objectives. The first one is to create new intermodal solutions which take into consideration passengers' needs and allow for the maximum level of flexibility. Of course, the idea of diving a little bit more into the topic of demand responsive transport really falls into this first objective. The second objective of the project is to promote intermodal connection in the program area, which means Italy and Croatia. But also as third objective of the project, we focus on innovative technologies to adapt smart mobility, sustainable multimodal and seamless transport solutions. This is mainly done through pilot and testing of actions, and maybe later on we'll have the chance to talk about them with some of the partners that are joining us. But really today I'm very excited and interested in learning more about demand responsive transport with one of the protagonists of this small revolution, if we could call it like that. One of my main interests is really to understand how this has become a reality for many cities, and especially what is the potential of demand responsive transport, especially for those areas that are maybe less served by public transportation or that could benefit from this kind of solution. And today is also, actually today marks the fifth and last webinar for this series. However, ICARUS will also launch another smaller series of webinar related to MaaS, Mobility as a Service, which I think is very much related to DRT anyway. So if you can reach us through our website or social networks, or if you leave us your email, we'll keep you updated on that. And we really hope that this one webinar and the chat that we're going to have today with Josh is going to interest you as well. So that being said, I'd like to thank you once more for your participation, and I'll leave the floor to Josh. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leonora. A brief introduction of Joshua. Many thanks, Joshua, for being here today, because it's a very, good opportunity for opening a dialogue among, part of the attendants today are from the ICARUS project. Most of them are from public authorities. So the opportunity today is to opening a dialogue from the perspective of the market, let's say, the perspective of the operator, and which could be the perspective of the public authorities in boosting and in supporting somehow this new approach to the urban mobility. The today's speaker is Joshua Biondi, who is the Business Development Manager at Shotl. Shotl is a very active startup based in Barcelona. that provides ICT solutions on the topic of the demand responsive transport. So I will, just for the agenda, we will have a first part of this talk, more or less half of the talk today, in which Joshua will share with us some topics, some questions, addressing some questions to the audience. And then we will have the remaining part for gathering some questions, some everything from the audience, just for opening, as I mentioned before, these links between the operator and the public authority side or the audience side, let's say. Okay, Joshua, many thanks again. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lucio. Thank you so much, Eleonora, for the introduction. As was already mentioned, the topic today is demand responsive transportation. What's next? A conversation with Shotl. Through this conversation, I'm going to be sharing what Shotl has done so far. Maybe we can capitalize on some of those insights and some of the data that we've derived from our operations to give us a starting point, a foundation to which we can base the question of what's next for post-COVID mobility solutions, future mobility solutions, and beyond. So first of all, Shotl, thanks for the brief introduction. Lucio, I'll supplement it by saying we are on the cusp of going from startup to non-startup. So we've been in the mobility industry for 4 years. But what we do is we focus on one thing. We don't have any other kind of lines of projects or products. We focus on software which empowers transport operators or private companies. So anyone who has the fleet and the vehicles and wants to provide optimized shared transportation. And that's what our software does. It's for the implement and then manage. As I said, we've been around since 2016, where we launched with a minimal viable product. And then 2019, we did a complete revamp of our product to bring it up to date to what I'll be showing you today. As far as traction in the market, we are mainly prevalent in Europe, or we do have an active operation in Kawasaki, Japan. We've done a pilot in Brazil. And as for our active operations in Europe, as you can see, they're primarily public transportation operations. So this is conversations with public authorities, with transport operators who have the public concession to operate in that area, and determining then going on demand for whatever factors or whatever specific operation we're thinking, whatever KPIs, whatever intention it is to better the mobility solution and offer for this local citizens, it's better to go on demand. As you can see, we do have corporate operations in Germany. I'll speak about a bit more about that later on. Essex County, we have done student transportation. We do transportation for people with reduced mobility. That's what PRM is in Seville and in Portugal. And we've also done some autonomous vehicle piloting in Finland and in Norway. So demand responsive transportation, the 4 big concepts. It's abandoning the century-old operational model of the fixed line, fixed schedule. Which is a very simple operating model where you implement it once and the vehicle goes round and round. Obviously, it presents some limitations. So abandoning that simplistic operational model, you do have to implement algorithm technology to replace the dynamic routing, which is necessary to satisfy all the requests which are captured through a platform that can be an application. And then obviously the routes are communicated to the driver once that translation has been made. And that brings us to the 3 components of the technology: the passenger app, obviously to capture the demands, the booking platform, the driver application. Drivers are informed of the dynamic route at all times. It also is configured and designed to be as simple as possible for the driver to receive this automatic dispatching. And then the management module, which obviously allows configuration and then supervision for anyone involved in the operation, from the transport operator to the public authority. The booking procedure, as you can see, it's consumer centric. It's designed to replicate, to incentivize the user using a flow which we can recognize and is familiar to us from what we can expect to be ride-hailing services. So it's obviously origin destination. We have 2 modalities of requesting a ride, and we can request a service as soon as possible, what we call the ride now functionality, and then we can schedule a ride for the future. And then in a split seconds, the algorithm does their job and we get an offer. Now, this step is very important. The algorithms are contextualizing our request, our origin, destination, and time, date combination into what the vehicles are already doing. and it gives us an offer immediately for the user to be able to review and then confirm. The driver app, as I mentioned, is as simple as possible. There's a navigation interface and then there's an action interface. The driver has to interact with the system for pickups and drop-offs. So it has to inform the system of who's boarding the vehicle or who hasn't shown up, for the system to be able to make the appropriate calculations and re-optimizations every couple of seconds. Now, the concept of virtual stops has many advantages. This also is very tied to the legal framework of the city, of the country where you're operating in. But it does offer some advantages in the sense that you can, if the vehicle is only allowed to stop at bus stops, or you can link all those bus stops together into one network. So what might be 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 different bus lines are now just one unique virtual stop. But if the legal framework obviously allows it, then you can set a virtual stop by coordinates in whatever point of the street that the vehicle is able to stop with, and therefore expand coverage and also manage some traffic issues that might be arising from vehicles stopping in the middle of the street. Our perception on data is that it has to be shared. It's the client's property. You know, all the data is generated from the operation. We review internally. We make sure that the KPIs, which we established as to being paramount in what is the user experience, are being met. So the demand patterns aren't spiraling out of control. The waiting times aren't spiraling out of control. Travel times, all these important factors. But also we give this in data over to the client. So we give it in graphed form and we give it in raw format for them to, first of all, to have property of what is rightfully theirs, but also have the tools and the platform to take informed decisions on how to further optimize. Now, where do we see Shotl? Where have we seen it? We've seen it replace the way users interact with their public transportation, with their bus, with their local bus in suburban and rural contexts. We've seen it provide in more urban context, or what we all know as the first mile, last mile coverage. So complementing existing mobility lines. It can be railway, it can be metro, or it can even be other bus lines that do run efficiently but are not accessible to anyone. So therefore creating that accessibility with incentivize the user to use that railway line. It didn't take us long to look at the corporate world and realize that there's mobility requirements that exist in business parks and university campuses and airports, which do not fit into a fixed line, fixed schedule operating model, and therefore need to be solved on demand. When we look at the market analysis, this ties into a bit what we were talking about before. In the city, we have a variety of mobility offers. You know, we have the metro, we have the train, we have car sharing, bike sharing, carpooling, and so forth. So the gap between demand and offer does exist, but it's not as significant as when we leave the city limits. In fact, the mobility requirement for citizens outside of the city, because the conformation of the environment is more sparse, people actually they need to move more, and there's actually less offer. So that's where demand responsive transportation has the potential to fill this void and really give the users a comfortable and a mobility solution which really competes with the private car and does achieve a high level of autonomy and independence for its users. In fact, as we can see, the on-demand public transportation software possibilities once we leave the 1 million population city are much greater. I'm going to go ahead and move into a use case. This is Vallirana. This is a suburb in the outskirts of Barcelona, and it really does provide a unique insight into what is a really replicable operational model and kind of environment. So here, this is one of our public transportation operations where we've determined with the public authority and the operator they're going on demand better serves its citizens. A little bit about Vallirana. As I said, the people involved in the operation are ourselves, the bus operator, and the town council. And Vallirana provides a confirmation which is not simple. It's a suburb which is situated in not the easiest of geographical environments, and therefore presented some challenges. And obviously, we have a look at the existing public transportation. So what Vallirana had is 4 different lines served by a single vehicle. So one line, so the vehicle would move from the green line to the purple line, then to the yellow line, then to the orange, and then go back to the green one, and so forth. So the travel times might have been a bit inefficient, but the waiting times weren't. The vehicle maybe was available at the same stop maybe once every one or 2 hours. Therefore, we've identified one weakness. We identified that the waiting time, the accessibility is a factor, and a factor that we must therefore focus on our operational proposal on. And that brings us to the fixed route and fixed schedule operating model. Obviously, there's in a fixed route and fixed schedule, there's only certain combinations of locations of origin and destination, which actually makes sense, which are actually efficient. But anything that falls out of that is completely inefficient and therefore does not be contemplated by the user. So once you move to a demand responsive transportation where through a network of virtual stops, you're interconnecting all available locations through the infrastructure which is available, which is just the roads which are available to everyone to drive across, you suddenly provide an infinite combinations of efficient transportation between locations. And that's exactly what our virtual stop network that we designed was focused on, was focusing on connecting residential areas with central business areas, connecting residential areas with train stations, and therefore expanding the coverage when compared to the previous operating model. And this is the service that was launched. As you can see, and this is very important, the city determined that from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then from 3 to 6, therefore what we know as peak times, that they were going to keep the previous operational schedule. They realized that the demand patterns and the demand data said that, well, they were transporting enough people, but during those non-peak times is when demand transportation really shines, because therefore you have the vehicle dynamically routed to all the different requests. And what we saw is quite a positive response. This new kind of revolutionized way for the citizens to interact with their bus, and now having a digital platform or application, it brings the public bus into the 21st century. And what we saw is an exponential rise of usage and a very positive response. And as you can see, from pre-shuttle to post-shuttle 3 months later, we nearly triplicated the amount of passengers per day, the ridership. Some interesting data from the operational perspective is, of course, the operational costs. What we're basically doing is offering to the user a better experience, but we're also offering to the city a less subsidized service, a more cost-efficient service. And in fact, the operational costs went up. They went up by 4%, but this is because the vehicle's doing more kilometers. It's more requested. It's transporting more passengers. In fact, it's transporting 80% more passengers. So a 4% increase in operational costs compared to an 80% increase in revenue is quite a positive outcome, as we can see. Now, where does Vallirana place kind of in our other operations? Well, we've been able to develop a kind of a model. The operational area kind of influences how many passengers per vehicle. Obviously, the distances to cross are larger, and therefore the passengers per hour decreases. The larger area, you need larger vehicles to achieve the same levels of passengers per hour that you would achieve with one vehicle in a smaller area. Another interesting data is occupancy. In Vallirana, we serve with one vehicle. It's a 16-seater minibus. But as you can see, occupancy never goes over 8. And that's very interesting in the sense that we have high ridership, but we don't need what we've all known up to now to be the standard of the big bus, the big occupancy bus in a fixed schedule and a fixed route operational model where you're piling passengers together, and therefore you need a large vehicle to be able to cater to these occupancies. Now you have passengers routed intelligently, more directly to their destination, and therefore people are getting on and getting off quicker, and therefore you don't need those large, expensive vehicles. Moving on to COVID-19 and DRT, what are our insights? What are the data we collected, and what are the insights and the conclusions that we can share? Now, one of the main kind of advantages of having a digitized operation when it comes to lockdowns and drastic events such as the COVID-19 is you're able to merge operations together. You're able to merge operations, and here we see 2 operations that we merged together into one because the demand dropped, and we could now serve both of them in one vehicle. And digitally, this is something you can do in 24 hours. Obviously, the limited capacity of vehicles, once you have a digital profile for a vehicle, although in reality it has 16 seats, well, you can configure it to have 8. And therefore the service it's only offering eight seats to the public. The booking system only offers those 8 seats, which complies with the 50% capacity regulation to curb the limit of the virus. So that's another advantage that we've seen. And demand responsive, of course, it shines most in low demand operations. And with COVID, it kind of all became low demand, and that's where demand responsive really made its greater impact. No longer having those vehicles go round and round completely empty, but having mobility requirements. So people needed to move. That never ceased to exist, that requirement, but having vehicles dynamically routed to where the demand was. Now we're going to have a look at the data set, which is compiled from 3 different operations: Cambarata, Cantraval, and Les Planes, which are all in the Sant Cugat area, just outside of Barcelona. And this is data we collected between March and June 2020. Now, what we see here is the 3 operations in the 3 rows, and then we divide it by time of day. And then for each section, we cross the first 28 weeks of the year. So obviously, at week 12, we see for every hour, we see the big drop, which represents the lockdown. And then we can see what the recovery looks like. So we're going to go into the conclusions. But as you can see, the 7 a.m. rush decreased dramatically and never really returned. That gives us some insights on workforce patterns. But one interesting thing we can see is that 5 o'clock on the top operation, Cambarata, the 5 o'clock, it did recuperate. And in 6 o'clock, it actually recuperated and gained more ridership than it did pre-COVID. While in the other operations, it's decreased or it remained constant. Anyway, what are the conclusions? That, of course, the closure of schools meant that mobility was affected. And this is a massive market for public transportation. But as we said, even though students are staying at home at 6 p.m., we saw, and especially in Cambarata, we saw comparable levels of ridership before and after. The state of emergency in Sant Cugat issued that public transportation were to be closed, and for our operations, our on-demand operations, to be the only transportation to be offered, and therefore we saw an increase in the ridership due to that. As we saw before, we saw a drop in the 7 a.m. rush, but we saw not such a drastic drop in the 5 o'clock rush. This makes us think, obviously, remote working affected the early get to work rush, but still, what obviously the 5 o'clock transportation for leisure was maintained. And we've also been able to comparably determine that compared with traditional bus lines, DRT, demand responsive transportation lines, have recuperated quicker. The perception it's very interesting. The perception of the public bus suffered a lot. Suffered a lot in terms of safety, and suffered a lot in terms of spread of the virus. While DRT, smaller vehicles, dynamically routed, the fact that you can request them through the application, for some reason the public perception was completely different, and this made that there was a kind of a transportation of mobility solution that survived better this horrible perception that COVID has kind of launched against the public transportation world. Moving over to what's next, the focus of this webinar. What's next for demand responsive transportation? Now, we can determine right now what are some applications for DRT that we see that we're going to see as very relevant in the coming future. And the first one is the night bus. This is an operation that we have in Pavia. It's obviously on hold at the moment because of the restrictions, but the night bus is a perfect candidate for demand responsive transportation. It is by very essence a low demand kind of operation, and where origin destination is combinations are sporadic. They're not you cannot prescribe them. You cannot expect to one day to another to know where the demand is going to be, and therefore you need that flexible, dynamic operating model. Another thing that we've seen is that people reduce mobility. So transportation for non-emergency patients. This is something we do in Valencia, and this is something we do in Lisbon. And it's aimed to a certain subset of patients or the population who otherwise would not have any kind of transportation needs. They would achieve a high level of independence and autonomy. And that's something that public authorities are focusing on. And that's where something that demand responsive transportation model fits in very well. Now, I also wanted to to supplement what I was talking about earlier as the first mile, last mile, these are two operations that we have in Barcelona and Torre Baró, where there is a train line, but there is a neighborhood nearby which is completely unserved. This neighborhood means that to catch that train, you need to walk 5 kilometers, and therefore it's inconceivable for someone to not jump into the car, to not consider the private car as the sole kind of transportation solution, which can give us a comfortable solution. Therefore, it's a train line that's missing out on market. It's a train line that's missing out on users, and therefore by supplying a single vehicle and dynamically routed to feed users into this train line, we're able to completely convert the mobility patterns and habits of a very dense and very prevalent kind of subset and neighborhood in Barcelona. And we do the same in Kawasaki. In Kawasaki, the train line, the train company Odakyo has a train stop, and what they wanted to provide is that first mile, last mile, to have a door-to-door solution for their train line customers. And they've actually done it in a mobility as a service platform, providing both the train and the on-demand shuttle on the same platform. Now, the rural is a type of environment which has received more weight. We've seen a workforce exodus due to COVID-19. A lot of people moving back into their previous places of residence. So suddenly now the rural world has more weight. There are more mobility requirements, and public authorities have deemed it as a more important challenge that to solve the mobility requirements. And it's also what the mobility players have been looking at. It's, as I said earlier, it's where the offer and the demand gap is most largest, and therefore that the business opportunities are most prevalent, and therefore represents a very tasty slice of the pie. And that's something we do in Stradella as well. Stradella, we link a community or an area, a rural area, full of small isolated communities into a single network of on-demand through the virtual stop network. And what we're doing is we're connecting them to a larger urban center, which in this case would be Stradella. The corporate world presents many challenges and many opportunities as well. In the Munich airports, we serve the employees. Now, the corporate world is more specific. Companies may or may not have this mobility requirements, but Munich airport did. They required their employees to move from landside to airside for engineers, even from office workers from office building to office building, but the distances were too large to travel on foot. And what they used to use is a fleet of vehicles, which they just let their employees use, and didn't take them long to realize that this is an inefficient use of company resources. And they basically eliminated 67 of those vehicles and made use of 3, which are now powered by Shotl technology. Of course, we can't talk about the future without talking about the MaaS ecosystem. Here at Shotl, we took 2020, we took the period of calm and low demand and low business opportunities to develop our own API. Now, standardization of API is a hot topic, especially in America, where standardization of MaaS concepts such as the GTFS Flex, and API is a focus. In Europe, not so much. In Europe, APIs represents more of a value proposition that one software supplier might have compared to another. Well, at Shotl, we have purposely designed our own, and it basically cuts off the front end of the application and makes our back end available to be integrated into any journey planner or mobility aggregator, such as a MaaS platform. Now, the MaaS world is defined by certain defining factors. I believe it's consumer centric in a sense. It's all about bringing the mobility marketplace and offer it in the most comprehensive way possible. Through that, we can also provide incentivizing the way we present this information. If we want to present bike sharing over the taxi because it represents less CO2, so mobility as a service has this power. It has this power to change mobility habits, and therefore all the financing that we've been seeing coming down from national and European level public administration, it represents this. It represents the power of the mobility all in one application. Excuse me. Of course, what's true for our data is true for any other data. The digitization of demand and operations. Once you'll be able to have access to this information, now cities and councils and regions have access to what really are the mobility requirements of their users, of their citizens, and can now replicate what used to be long, lengthy, and costly processes of consultancies and studies and seeing where the demand is and surveys. Well, now it's data that arrives in their back pocket every week because users have the incentive to communicate that information through the mobility as a service platform. Obviously, servitization, mobility as a service, software as a service, bikes as a service instead of ownership. So the move away from the ownership is something that we've seen very prevalent up to now, but we're also seeing something that's going to be expanding with the arrival of the circular economy, of the moving away from private ownership, but instead of sharing, something that very much fits into the mobility as a service platform and what a lot of mobility providers are kind of focusing on. And I spoke earlier about the optimization cycle. This is something that is now facilitated. It's facilitated through data mining. This is true for Shotl. We receive the operational data. We can make adjustments to the shift structure. So what vehicles are available when, that determines the offer, which determines the availability and the demand, the ridership, and so on. And that continuously goes around and around. And suddenly this is a cycle that you can repeat every week instead of doing it once a year in a costly manner that used to be done by transport operators and city councils before. Moving on to autonomous vehicles. Now, as part of the Fabulous Horizon 2020 in program Fabulous, we integrated our APIs with Sensible 4 autonomous vehicles. Now, what we're seeing on screen right now is the Gacha. It's a Sensible 4 autonomous vehicle model, which is designed. They're a Finnish company, so it's designed to withstand harsh weather conditions. And through API integration, so what is a autonomous vehicle shuttle, if not a transportation solution that needs to be offered to the citizens? And to have technology like an autonomous electric vehicle offered in a fixed line, fixed schedule operational model doesn't make any sense. Therefore, using shuttle technology, shuttle front end application, to be requesting the autonomous vehicle as an as a mobility solution. And we did this in Pasila in Finland with the autonomous vehicle, and we also did in Gjesdal in Norway with a retrofitted Toyota Pro Haze. Moving on to some kind of different operational models which fall out of the standard traditional one network of virtual stops, is we can explore hybrid fixed line on demand routes. This is where a bus line has a single route and it respects it as a fixed line, fixed schedule, but certain stops can be activated only if there's demand. So that's another kind of fuel saving, kilometer saving. It's not time saving because the vehicle still has to stop at the fixed stop with a fixed schedule. If it arrives early, it needs to stop and wait there. But you have some virtual stops that can be activated and deactivated based on the demand. Obviously, multimodal transportation is something that we see very prevalent in the corporate and especially in the corporate world, where it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration between the traditional big bus, where dynamically we route passengers to a meeting point to pile these passengers into a big bus, and therefore achieving a high level of occupancy, high level of efficiency of these big buses, and then distributing them in a first mile, last mile combination. I just want to finish this presentation. We're getting towards the end. I'm getting conscious of the time. That at the end of the day, as you can see, Shotl is keeping an eye on the present. You know, in the Mediterranean Europe, public transportation is changing, and we're proud to say that we're part of that change, especially in Italy. In my home country, I've seen Shotl going implemented from town to town and seeing it gain some traction and may make a difference. But also keeping an eye on the future, mobility as a service with our API at our autonomous vehicle projects, always knowing where the next challenges are going to be and being prepared for them. At this point, I'd like to open up the discussion. I don't know if anyone's got any questions, either through the chat or like to voice directly.
Okay, thank you so much, Joshua, for the very dense and interesting presentation. So I have some questions, but I prefer to open the floor to the audience, starting for the audience. If Gabriele Grea, if you want to directly open the question to Joshua, you are free. Otherwise, we collect from the chat. The same with Nicola. If you want to put the question directly to Joshua, otherwise we collect. Please, okay. Gabriele.
Okay, thanks, Lucio. I thought you were reading them, but never mind. Thank you very much. I was curious about the figures you showed at the beginning related to the economic result. And you said there's a positive result in terms of costs, of cost per passenger. And I was wondering if you also have a figure on cost per passenger kilometer, to be more precise, for the public transport companies, of course.
Yes, the IPK. So that's is concurrent with the figures I've shown. What those comparisons are done, Vallirana is a perfect use case because we went from fixed schedule, fixed line with one vehicle to on demand with one vehicle, and therefore the figures are very comparable. In many other operations, the comparing is completely useless. It's apples and oranges, and therefore Vallirana data is very useful in that sense, because you're gone from the similar coverage, the similar operational costs, therefore the cost of having the same vehicle, the same driver, implemented the same hours a day, and therefore that's the comparison we did. I don't believe IPK was included, but at the top of my head, I think it decreased proportionally with what we saw between the operational costs covered by the ticket sales. So we saw a rising of about 15%, of the operational costs covered by the ticket sales, and I think the IPK was in line with that number.
Okay, thanks.
Right, I'll go ahead and read out loud the second question that we got from the municipality of Ravenna.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying that a DRT service is also active on their territory with the use of Shotl. Mm-hmm. I would like to ask Josh if in using Shotl there is data on the age ranges, and if there is data on the times of use of the DRT, and if you could tell us something about it.
Data related specifically to the Ravenna operation?
I think you can maybe talk in general
okay.
about that, and then yeah, maybe if you know something about Ravenna, surely you can mention that.
Okay, as far as age, age is something that our application can ask, but it's a configuration that none of our clients have actually requested. None of our clients have requested us to capture that kind of data. So we don't have the data set to be able to offer, because in no case our clients, I think in the Stradella operation, I can safely conclude that because of the reservation channel, so not so much the data we collect directly from when people sign up, but the reservation channel and the feedback we got from our local partners there, or clients there, is that in no moment is less than 70% of the requests coming through phone. So Stradella, what they've done is they provided a hotline. Our management module allows manual introduction of reservations, so it doesn't have to go through the smartphone, it doesn't have to go through the application. So, and therefore you're kind of the democratization of and opening up the availability and the possibility of using demand responsive transportation to people who may be part of an older demographic or not so smartphone literate. So in no case, in no kind of week or data set that we've seen has been less than 70% that people are calling up. And most of the people are calling up are of the older demographic. So that's an important operation when thinking about rural operations. Rural operations, you are serving a demographic, and you have to be very conscious that you're serving a demographic which for the most part, from the data we've seen, is comprised of older adults and older adult passengers, which are requiring the demand responsive transportation. And that's why the phone line is so useful there. As I said, we don't have the age data because to my knowledge, no client has requested us to capture that data when signing up. So in signing up, you have your name, your email, your phone, but in no moment, and there is that option, but in no moments do we have how old are you.
Do you have any expectation on certain types of services? For example, you mentioned the one in Pavia, which obviously not now, but in the future, it is going to be a night service. So possibly that kind of service is going to target different age ranges of the population. Do you think, or?
Absolutely, I believe that the night service is going to be particularly used by a teenage population that requires the moving into town and back home due to leisure activities. I believe that we're going to see a boom of people wanting to enjoy their cities after these COVID restrictions are lifted. And I think that the data that we're going to be seeing and the relevance and the usage and the ridership of the Pavia night bus is going to be very interesting in demonstrating that.
All right. So I think the second part of this question, which I don't know if you just want to add something to that, is the times of use of the service.
Okay, I think in Vallirana in Vallirana we don't offer the service at all times. In some other operations, we see a morning peak and an afternoon peak, so concurrent with kind of the standard data pattern that we see generally. So a morning peak and an afternoon peak. The morning peak is more broad. It's not just to go to work, but it peaks down after lunchtime and then starts back up in the mid-afternoon. And that's great because the vehicle, when there's no requests, it's standing still. It's not wasting fuel. It's not gaining those kilometers, which then eventually translate into in costs of maintaining the vehicle. So when there are no requests, the vehicle stays still, and that's one thing that's been proving is very useful when we have those peak times. So some operations are concurrent with that general demand pattern, while others provide some anomalies in the sense of Stradella. We see a more distributed use because the distances are more large. People are moving to Stradella to go to medical appointments. It's a broader scope. The DRT is being used by different age groups for different reasons. While in some maybe more closed operations, like there can be in Vallirana, for example, the demographic in the market is more reduced. The people that are moving to see friends, and therefore the demand patterns fit into the more conventional demand pattern.
Thank you.
I've got a question before moving to Ugo's question, and just for shifting the reasoning from a quantitative assessment of the services to a qualitative assessment of the services from the user perspective, which are the main key success factor on this level? I mean, I'm just thinking about the vehicle. If you see that a success factor could be the use of a shuttle instead of normal buses, for example, or whatever in terms of from the user perspective and from the user will to join this new service, this new kind of service.
I'm very sorry, Lucio. I don't know if you know.
We got some problem with Joshua.
Really sorry about that. Yeah, the power just went out in my house, and I'm just reconnecting with my phone. Can you just repeat that question?
Okay, no problem. No, I'm thinking about some qualitative feedbacks from the user perspective. For example, the type of vehicles, the fact that whatever. Do you have some feedbacks from this level of assessment? No, Joshua has some problems. Okay.
Maybe your question was just too hard.
Just too high. Okay. We could collect some other question from the audience, waiting from the.
I think there are quite a bit of questions about data. So we have one about the interaction between Shotl and taxi, and one on APIs. So as soon as he comes back, we'll have some food for thought.
Okay, we can also open the discussion from the perspective of the audience in these terms, and what could be some, let's say, bottlenecks in terms of how to implement this kind of solutions in the city right now. From the public authority perspective, for example, I would ask city of Ravenna, still here, Nicola?
I think maybe we could start with some of the ICARUS partners if they're available to just share some of their experience.
City of Venice, someone here? No. Okay, Ugo Poli, from your perspective, you have just put some question to Joshua. If you want to start some reasonings on your question with
no, but I would like to catch up the invitation of Eleonora, because the very interesting presentation of Joshua brought me to think to a concrete case that is the organization of the local public transport on the karst part of the municipality of Trieste. Typical rural area where there are residents and local activities, where students and workers need connection downtown, and the actual situation is to have large buses running most of the day substantially empty, wasting money and polluting the nice environment of the Carso, without real satisfaction of the public, which never finds appropriate matching between bus rides and their timing, daily timing of life. Actually, I was thinking already since time on the possibility to use smaller buses to have a better coordination between a last mile logic and the main axis between the center Carso and downtown Trieste. But I really didn't imagine the feasibility and the actual implementation of such a service that is working, technologically available, and I suppose certainly cost effective compared with what are the actual and social costs of the current mismanagement of TPL. And this is about a concrete case that could be variously developed in terms of urban planning and organization of the mobility services in one of our areas. I think to know that also the region of Friuli Venezia Giulia, I don't know if some of our friends from the region is attending, but the region of Friuli Venezia Giulia and the new company implementing the public local transport service are studying, but actually there is very little to study here, because everything is in place and could be quickly become a pilot implementation to change the mood.
Okay.
Of all the story.
Thank you, Ugo. I think Joshua is coming back. Joshua, can you?
Great. So I can also add my last question. If there are data on the interaction between the supply of shuttle services and the taxi services, if they are growing or decreasing, and how was balanced.
Okay, first of all, you can hear me, correct?
Yeah, right.
First of all, apologies. There seemed to be a power outage. Lucio, I will get to your question that you repeated twice.
Now we can recap.
Okay.
Words.
Well, to your question about taxi, if we've seen a raise, you're talking about demand when it comes to public transportation and taxi, is that correct?
Yeah, precisely.
Well, we've been looking at the taxi world. The taxi world we know is suffering. We seem that it's the perfect time to them to get involved and offer them work and offer these taxi drivers that are suffering some work by solving also some mobility requirements that we know exist. I mean, the lockdown has stopped people from going to the airport. It stopped a major market share that taxis were living on, but people didn't stop needing to move around. And therefore, we were trying to redirect the taxi to serve a different focus, to serve a different purpose within the mobility ecosystems. We're no longer serving that kind of demographic for those kind of services, but to serve the citizen in their neighborhood to neighborhood and the last mile kind of transportation. So we know that the taxis have seen a dramatic drop in demands, and we see, because taxi drivers are not subsidized, therefore the economic model needs to be economically sustainable from day one, because someone has to pay those taxi drivers. And if you contract them per hour, there is a curve from when you implement a new service like demand responsive transportation. In Vallirana, we saw it was 3 months, and it became word of mouth. People tried it, they found it useful. The more people tried it, and so was that exponential rise of users. Therefore, a taxi driver will represent the road to being economically sustainable. So therefore, those 25 euros an hour, 30 euros an hour that the taxi driver is getting paid, you're getting back in ticket sales. But you do need that curve, so you have less security. So it's a different kind of business model and a different kind of legal structure. But surely the time is now to kind of explore how taxi drivers can maintain work by serving a different purpose, and instead of driving around looking for demand, but having algorithms tell them where the demand is, that routing them to where the demand is. So there's a lot of synergies that make a lot of sense, but still some very important gaps that kind of prevented us as a Shotl, because we're very motivated in this. And I take advantage that you mentioned the taxi drivers to mention it. There are still some obstacles from perception of taxi drivers that this is actually going to be economically sustainable, that's going to be a valid line of business for them. So therefore, there is not the full motivation for them to jump on board. So we're still exploring that conversation. But as far as transport operators, a lot of people are, and a lot of public authorities are absolutely convinced that demand responsive transportation is the way, that the numbers confirm it. Ridership is low, operational costs are high and getting higher, and subsidies are not going to be there next year. So there's a lot of doubts. But still, the funding and the motivation to implement new ways of mobility are maybe not there, and the motivation. So there's a lot of factors that point towards demand responsive transportation to being a solution, a very valid solution, but still some perception and some bureaucratic kind of processes which are kind of stopping us or putting the brakes on what could be more and more demand responsive transportation operations.
Thank you.
Josh, maybe I can, since we just have a couple of minutes left, I can just put forward the question Gabriele has written in the chat box.
Absolutely.
So he's saying that so fascinating approach to APIs. What would your policy be about open APIs? Do you have any plan of sharing, exchanging APIs, for example, between DRT and scheduled services to foster better integration?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been looking at GTFS Flex and what in America they're trying to do with standardization of GTFS Flex and APIs, and absolutely open to a standardized API or open to open API sharing information. Our API is available online. All the endpoints are available online. It's completely available to everyone. I could send everyone in this meeting right now a link to go look at our API. It's what we designed, and it's. If we were to have to adapt our system to an existing API, it would be work, but the benefits would largely outweigh. If everyone adapts to the same API, then we suddenly have a massive technical obstacle which MaaS mobility as a service has to face completely eliminated. So absolutely open to it.
Okay, thank you, Josh. And just we have some minutes for the last questions. My question was about the quality perspective of the users and the user experiences, which is the key factors.
The key factors is the fact that we provide a software and that drivers and vehicles are provided. So there's two sides to that service. There's two sides to that passenger getting onto a vehicle and getting dropped off. There's what the algorithms do, and this is quality control, which is absolutely under our responsibility. And then there's the driver and the vehicle. In our application, we have type form surveys that captures satisfaction data, and we've seen some positive numbers. We've seen some positive numbers in the sense that moving towards as you say, what is the quality control of the service, and what does Shotl bring to the added quality of the service? Definitely, passengers getting to the destination quicker. Seeing the vehicle arrive on your screen means that you're never wondering where it is. Travel times have dropped, so the whole experience of getting to your destination is largely improved. The vehicle on the day and the driver and so forth has never been a factor, and this means that we never partnered up with an operator who did their job badly, which affected us and affected the perception that Shotl had. Shotl is the logo, it's the application. So it is the perception that a bad driver and a bad vehicle is a bad Shotl offering. But we've never encountered that uncomfortable dynamic, and thank God for that.
Do you have some standard for the quality of vehicles and quality of drivers?
We assume that a local city council has their standards, and we don't ask for any additional standardization, because the operator, as I said, is the operator has the contract. They've won that contract for a certain reason.
Okay, and from your perspective, and generally speaking, do you think that you are serving new users of the public transport, or serving better the existing ones?
New users, absolutely. I often think about electric scooters, how they appeared on our streets in many cities around the world, and what that represents as far as dormant demand or induced demand. The fact that before electric scooters were around, I think we could all probably agree that we had a saturated mobility offering. No one was raising their hand saying, I need a new way to move around, please give it to me. And then electric scooters fell from the sky and satisfied that desire. But they appeared and they demonstrated to us that we did require a new way to move around, and they filled that gap and they satisfied that dormant demand that we had inside of us. And now we choose it, and now many places are closer and we move differently, and this affects demand patterns in how we contemplate and we plan our journeys and we plan our day. So demand responsive transportation isn't about serving the existing users of a bus better, but it's giving the bus and by consequence the public operator and the public authority the ability to enter into that market that up to now has been, it's been chewed up and it's been eaten by what is private companies, Lime, Uber. They're making use, and their bread and butter is the gaps in the public transportation offering. So our software is really much provided in empowering public authorities and making use of the investments which are already made, the drivers and the vehicles, using the infrastructure they already have, which are all the roads and all the bus stops joined together into one network, and therefore competing with Uber, competing with the taxi, and giving them new life and the ability to enter that market to what is the conventional public bus.
Yeah, thank you for your point. I think that this last sentences from Joshua could fix the point on the main challenges ahead from the public side on the topic of the urban mobility. If there are some other questions from the audience, we can collect. Otherwise, we could move to the conclusion. Joshua, many thanks for your availability, your interesting presentation, and we hope to have a future opportunity to share.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Knowledge.
Thank you.
Among us. And yeah, Eleonora, we could conclude.
Yeah, also from my side, thank you so much, Josh, for all the information you sent, you shared with us, and your insights as well. I think if we have some burning questions, perhaps we can also get in touch with you.
Please do.
Yeah, but for the time being, thank you so much for the points you made.
Thank you so much. 1,000 apologies for the technical issues before.
No problem.
It was really out of my control, and
no worries.
And look forward to more of these.
All right,
okay.
Lovely. Thank you all, and so until next time.
Thank you everyone for listening.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.